Hey there, hope you are doing great. I'm doing good. In this video here, we're going to talk about deploying Django using Ubuntu 21.4, Apache, obviously Django, and MySQL here. I just wanted to do an updated version of this for basically 2021. I know the last video I have, I think uses Django 18.4, so it's about 2 years old, a little outdated, so I figured I'd update it. So here we go. All right, step one, set up a server. So what I'm going to be doing here is using DigitalOcean as my VPS, my virtual private server provider. You can use whatever virtual private service provider that's out there. I use AWS, Amazon Web Services, and I also recommend Linode.com as well. But just in this case, I'll be using DigitalOcean. You can click this link. It'll also be in the description of the video. Should basically give you $100 of DigitalOcean credits. Obviously, it's a referral link, so I get a little bit of a kickback. Scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type of deal. You're going to register, you're going to log into DigitalOcean, and then we're going to create a new droplet. So when you're creating a new droplet, there's multiple kind of different configuration options, and I'll go over this. But this is kind of the very first step. This is what DigitalOcean looks like. Left sidebar here, top nav bar for our navigation. I'm just going to click up here in the create. So I'm going to click create and then droplet. And that's going to create a new server for us. So what we really want to look for is we just want to use a base Ubuntu image. You can, if you want, explore the marketplace, which has a bunch of pre-configured virtual private servers. But I just want to start from a clean slate. So that's just the way I prefer to do things. So I'm just going to go with just a clean Ubuntu 21.4 server, 64-bit there. Choose a plan. I'm going for the cheapest one here. Obviously, we're just kind of playing around with local, local development and whatnot. So we just need a very cheap kind of basic plan. So shared CPU, basic CPU options. You want to click this one, which is regular Intel with SSD. And then just the cheapest option, $5 a month. Unless whatever you're doing, you need a more advanced one, that's up to you. Data center region, you're going to want to choose whichever one of these is closest to kind of your location. It'll make things a little bit faster. I'm close to New York, so I'm just going to use a New York data center 1, 3, doesn't really matter. Choosing your data center regions down here starts to matter if you're talking about having a bunch of droplets and servers and whatnot interacting with each other. Then you kind of want them very close to each other and on the same region as well. But again, that's more advanced stuff. We just want to get this thing up and running. So I'm choosing the data center region that is close to me. Let's see, VPC network. Yep, don't care about that. Don't care about these additional options unless you really want them. Let's see, so authentication. For this, I highly recommend you use SSH keys, especially in production. However, this is just a quick little tutorial video focusing on deploying Django, not focusing on server security. So I am just going to use a root password here. And that way I'll be able to log in from root. I already got this randomly generated password I created. That way I'll be able to log into root from any basically terminal or PuTTY, or DigitalOcean also has access in here as well with this root password. If you do this, you definitely want to keep that root password handy. All right, other than that, finalize and create. We're going to create one droplet. If you want to create multiple, you can. But I'm going to create one droplet here, and the name of it is, you really want the name to be something descriptive. Like this whole Ubuntu S1 VPC, that doesn't really make sense to me. I really like to have my host names have something very descriptive about the content they're hosting, because if I'm running 20, 30, 40 or more, droplets, I just want to look at the name of it and have an idea of which one that's actually, running. You can do tags here, it doesn't matter. You can select a project here if you want. That's the projects up here on the left. Doesn't really do much other than it assigns a droplet to a project or just kind of puts it up underneath that project. Makes it a little bit quicker to access. but really doesn't do anything. If you want to enable backups, production level is probably good for our little demonstration deployment video. We could care less about backups. But if you do want to do backups, DigitalOcean will give you system level backups once a week. So with that, I'm just going to hit create droplet. And you're going to go here. It's going to bring up this view. Sometimes this takes a few seconds, 30 seconds, a couple minutes for it to fully run through all its processes to create this server, the droplet. So I'm just going to go ahead and pause the video for a second until it's done. All right, so it looks like it's done. You'll see here it shows me my droplet name. It shows me an IP address. So copy paste this, keep it handy because you're going to need it for several different things we're doing here. Other than that, if you want to get more information about it, you can click on it and you can read more about it. So you get access logs, turning things on and off, rebooting, you can all do from here. Resizing, so at some point in the future, if you're running a project here and you're like, oh, well, I'm getting a bunch more users than I expected, I need a little bit more memory or a little bit more CPU power, you can just quickly and easily do it from here. It shuts your droplet off and then resizes it. It's pretty fast though, so it doesn't really cause much interference with your users. Then you can do networking, all sorts of other stuff. But let's see, that brings us up to, we did this, we did that setup of the server, we did all this. So that brings us up to basically connecting to our server. So there's a few different options to connect. The easiest one is going here to the DigitalOcean panel, clicking on the access and hitting launch droplet console. This is the easiest way to connect. So that's what I'm going to use for this video. However, if you do want to use PuTTY, if you're a Windows user, you have PuTTY installed, you're basically going to fire up PuTTY. You're going to click session, and then you're going to enter the IP address of the server. Make sure you're on port 22 because that's SSH. And then you'll hit open. And let me bring up my PuTTY. So this is my PuTTY, and I can just go ahead and click host name is the IP address I just created, port 22. We're connecting via SSH. All that's good, and I hit open. This pops up. It's off screen, but it popped up with a little pop-up asking me if I wanted to trust it. I hit yes, and I know this is really small. I apologize in the text there, but we're going to log in as root, and we're going to use that root password we used when we created it. And there you go. So I'm connected that way. The other way you can connect is through any type of command prompt that allows SSH. So right now this is git bash. And if I just do SSH, the root at the IP address, it's gonna do that same thing PuTTY said. Do I want to trust this? Yes, I do. I know what I'm connecting to. And now what is the root password? Got it over here, so I'm just gonna copy and paste it, and I'm connected that way. So there's multiple different ways you connect, but for this, to make things easy, I'm just going to use the DigitalOcean dashboard here and launching the droplet console. All right, so when we first connect, the very first thing we want to do when we connect is we basically want to apply our software updates. So we're going to run this command, the apt update and apt upgrade. And then after that's all done, this normally takes a while, a couple minutes. And then after that's done, we're going to want to reboot. You don't have to reboot, but it's just good practice. So if I come down here and I say apt update and apt upgrade, you'll see it goes through a bunch of things. It's going to prompt me a couple times. I'll wait for the first prompt here. There you go. You can read about what it's trying to install and whatnot. For most of these, you just hit yes to all of them. You'll have a couple more prompts that come up. Again, I'll wait for one more just to show you, and then I'll pause it. Actually, I'll pause the video and wait till it comes up. All right, here's an example of one of these pop-ups you'll see. You'll probably get a few of them, and you can read more about it. But for most of these, you can just select the default option, and that's going to be fine. So you just go in here, you select it, and you just hit enter. If you're doing any kind of more advanced stuff where you really kind of care about what those are, you can read more about it. But for us, this is a brand new clean install. We're just updating it, so we don't really care. We're just going to keep all the default stuff that Ubuntu wants us to. Alright, so I'm going to pause the video again until this is all done. Alright, it apparently dropped out. There we go. So it's basically all done, and all this is saying that a new kernel is available. All it's really saying is, hey, you should probably reboot. You don't have to, but if you don't reboot now, you're going to get kind of this thing constantly popping up through the rest of this process. So I'm just going to say, hey, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to restart some services there, just the default options. And then finally, I'm just going to, once this is done here, I'm just going to do a reboot. All right, console's disconnected because the virtual private server is shutting down and rebooting. It'll probably take a minute or two before it's fully rebooted and available for me to launch it again. All right, I gave it a minute or two, and now I'm going to go in here and I reconnected. So it's good. Everything is updated, and we're good to go. We're good to continue. So now we're going to go down, and we've made our software updates here, step 3. Step 4, we're going to create our directory structure. There's a lot of different opinions of where you should have your code live on a server. We're not going to talk about all the different opinions and pros and cons of each one. For this, we're just going to create a super simple directory structure. We're going to have it live at the root of our server. So we're going to first cd to root, and then we're going to create kind of this setup. So we're going to have basically a inside of our project here, whatever you want to call it. I'm calling mine Django dash project, but you can call yours whatever you want. Inside of that, we're going to have a site directory and a source directory. Inside of the site directory, we're going to have logs and public directories. And inside a public directory, we're going to have media and static. Why? What are we going to do with these? So site basically holds our server logs and all our public data. The source directory is going to hold the actual Django code, the Django project. The logs directory in the site is going to hold all our access and our error logs from Apache. And then the public folder in here, we're going to have media static. That's going to host all our static files like our CSS, JavaScript, whatnot, and our media files such as, user uploaded, user generated content is going to live in there. So that is our directory structure. There's many different ways you can set up your directory structure, but this is the way I'm going to do it. It's important if you're going to follow this tutorial to the T that you kind of do it this way, because a lot of your Apache configuration settings are going to rely on mainly where your source code is, and then also your media and static files are very important for Apache, that it knows where to find those. So I'm going to create this here. Let me bring up my terminal again. Alright, so we're going to cd to root. Oh, that's really big. Okay, there you go. Let's cd to root. And in here, I'm just going to make dir Django project. And then I'm going to cd into it. And I spelled it wrong, didn't I? Give me a second. Let me remove that. Move Django project to Django dash project. There we go. Now I'm going to cd into Django project. Make this a little bit bigger here. Alright, so now I'm in my Django project directory, right? So I got this upper level Django project 1 done. Now I need to make our next level, the site and the source. So let's do that. Make dir site and source. Alright, so if I do an ls, that's all in there. Now what I need to do is I need to make, inside of the site, I need to make logs and public. So let's cd into site, and let's make dir, what do we call it? Logs and public. All right, then inside of public, we need to cd into that and make that media and static. So cd public and make dir media and static. All right, that should be it. Let me cd up, cd up again. So back to the Django project. If I do a tree, I can't do it, so let me just install it real fast. It'll be fast here. I like tree, it's a good command. All right, so if I do tree now, there you go. I got site, logs, public, media static, and source. So that's my directory structure. Exactly what we said we're going to have there. So, all right, next. Next, we're going to install pip and set up a virtual environment. Pip is Python's package manager. Virtual environment basically allows us to have separate isolated environments for multiple installs. So you very easily could run multiple Django projects from this one server. They may rely on different Django versions or different package versions. So you want to keep those different kind of installs isolated. We're going to do that using virtual environment. So what we're going to do here is we need to do this, the sudo apt install python 3 pip, or just, I'm already logged in as root, so I don't need the sudo. I can just do apt install python 3 pip. And it'll take a minute to install, so I'm just going to pause it. All right, so that is installed. So I have python 3 pip installed. So if I do a pip3 freeze, it's going to show me basically everything that I have installed right now, which is all sorts of stuff that comes by default. But what I do want to install is VirtualEnv. It's a package that's going to allow me to create and manage these virtual environments. So you do pip3 install VirtualEnv. Pip3 install VirtualEnv. This install should be fast. There it is, so it's installed. Now if I do a pip3 freeze, I should see VirtualEnv listed there, right there. So I'm using 20.8.1 in this video for my VirtualEnv version. All right, now we're gonna actually create a virtual environment. So we're gonna make sure we're in whatever project name you used. Again, I'm using Django project. And we're gonna say VirtualEnv, VENV. So we're gonna create a new virtual environment. And then we're gonna basically say, we're gonna call the virtual environment folder VENV. If you wanna call your virtual environment folder something else, you would change this right here. And then this -p basically says, hey, the path that I want you to use, or the Python version I want you to use, is Python 3. You most likely don't need to do this. However, you will have Python 2 installed on your server as well by default. So we just basically want to make sure our virtual environment is, make sure we're using Python 3 as opposed to Python 2. Oop, wrong button there. So let's do that here. We're going to say I'm in my project folder where the site and the source live. So I'll just do VirtualEnv, VENV for the name of the folder, and then the -p for Python 3 version. It should be pretty fast. You can read more about what it does, but basically it just copies all your Python files over there. If I do an ls now, there is my VENV. And to activate it, to actually work on this, so right now if I do pip3 freeze, I'm still on kind of my root level, my global Python environment. I don't want to do that. I want to activate that brand new super clean virtual environment we just set up. So to do that, I do this. Source VENV, or the name of your virtual environment folder. Go in the bin directory and run the activate script. So I do source, then bin activate. And you'll notice now at the start of my command prompt, I have the name of my virtual environment in parentheses. That tells me I've activated, I'm working on my virtual environment. Now if I do a pip3 freeze, I get absolutely nothing. So I'm working on a very clean Python install, which is awesome. Now let's install Django. So I do pip install Django. As the time of this recording, it's 3.2.8. So you could just do a pip install Django like this. Pip install Django like that. It'll install the most current version. I'm just going to force it to 3.2.8. Doing that. Because that way, if you're watching this in the future, who knows, Django updates and there's some changes to the WSGI files or something that kind of throws a bunch of errors into here. So if you're following this to the T, just make sure you're working on 3.2.8. But really, it probably doesn't matter. If you're doing this later in the future and there's a Django version which breaks this configuration setup, let me know and I'll just create a new video showing how to do it for that new version. Alright, so now if I do a pip3 freeze, or I can just do pip at this point, but pip freeze, there's Django installed, and I got a bunch of other stuff that comes with Django, some of the dependencies there. So that's step 5. We've installed pip in our virtual environment. We're getting closer. Alright, so now let's create a Django project. So I've already done this step, making sure my virtual environment is activated and Django is installed. Now I want to cd into my project name and the src, or the source. So I'm going to go, okay, well, cd Django project source. Right now there's nothing in there. It's an empty folder. So I'm going to do this command right here, and before you type it, don't forget that little period in there. It's super important, at least for the way I'm setting things up, because it's going to change some of the paths. If you don't do that, it really doesn't matter, but your paths will need to be slightly different than what I have in my configuration files. So Django admin, start project. You give it some project name, which I'm going to call my project name tutorial. And then the period means install it in this current directory. If you don't have that, Django is going to create a new directory with this name and then install the project inside of that. So that's all that dot means. It says, hey, create the directory here. So if I do Django admin start project tutorial dot, I do an ls, and now in my source folder I'll have a manage.py and a tutorial. If you forgot that dot, you would have a folder called tutorial. You'd cd into that, you'd have another folder called manage.py and tutorial. So that's just the difference there. Inside the tutorial, I'll cd into that, and that's where my ASGI, more importantly, my settings, my URLs, and my WSGI live. Alright, so now that we have Django installed, we have a project created, it's living in our directory structure. Let's actually access it. So we're going to add our server's IP address to the settings.py. So I need to go into that settings.py. Let's see, that's in tutorial, and I'm just going to go nano settings.py. And here's my settings.py. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm looking for this, allowed host. So I need to add either this, which means all IP addresses are allowed to access this, all hosts can access this, or normally you just put the IP address of your container or your droplet. So I'd put the IP address for my container in here, or my VPS, my droplet. I'd save this, Control X, Y to save, and then press enter to exit. Now that I've allowed this host, my server, to access it, let's go ahead and run it. So I just do this python manage.py run server 0000:8000. So this 000 is important. If you just do the manage.py run server, let's look at that. If I just do the manage.py run server, I need to go up a directory. Yeah, there's manage.py. If I just do run server, it's going to start it at 127.0.0.1, which I'm not going to be able to access from my web browser. So I need to quit this by hitting Control C. And I need to say, hey, run server, but run it on 0.0.0.0 and port 8000. Now I should be able to go to my IP address in a browser. So open up a browser, just a second. All right, and there it is. So I opened up my browser, I went to my IP address, and I went to :8000. So my IP address, a colon, and 8000, and there is my Django project. So everything's working there. Now what we need to do is, we obviously don't want to just have to type in our port number every single time, so we're going to get rid of that here. But it's going to take us a little bit. So we got to this point where step 6 is done. We created our Django project. We saw our Django welcome page. Step 7 is to install MySQL. All right, so the first thing to do there is let's close out of our Control-C out of our server, our Python server, Django server, I should say. And then we're going to do apt install MySQL-server. MySQL is going to be my database. If you don't want to use MySQL, you don't have to do this. You can skip a few steps here. But I'm going to pause this and let MySQL server install. All right, MySQL is installed. Normally when you install MySQL, the next thing you'll do is this MySQL secure installation. Just kind of does some little security, enhancements, if you will, to MySQL. It's super fast, so we're going to do it anyways. Just MySQL secure installation is the command you're going to run. For this, you're going to get prompted a few times. You can basically select yes for all of these. So, validate password. Do we want to, MySQL to validate passwords? We do. For this tutorial, I'm going to set it to low. I guess it doesn't matter because I should have a strong password for my user anyway. So actually, I'll just set it up to strong. So that's number 2. Set a new password. So I got a random password here. Let's see if it likes this. I'm going to just paste it in. Yeah, apparently it likes that. That's good enough. Do I want to remove anonymous users? Yes, I do. Do I want to disallow root login remotely? Yes, I do. Do I want to remove my test database and access to it? Yes, I do. Do I want to reload my privilege tables? Yes, I do. So that's it. That's MySQL secure installation. Very simple, so you may as well do it. Now let's create a user and a database. So we're going to go into MySQL. So you just type in MySQL as your prompt, as your command, and you should enter the MySQL command line interface. So now we're going to create a user. This is going to be the user that our project, our Django project, is going to use to connect to our database. And then we're also going to create our database for our project. Then right here, we're going to say, hey, grant all privileges. So that database we just created, grant all the privileges on that. So that means create, read, update, delete, all sorts of other privileges that deal with database systems to that user on my project. Basically saying this user that I created has root level access, can do everything, has all privileges for this database right here. Then finally, we're going to flush our privileges. And all that basically means is reload the privilege table so that these changes that we just made right here take effect. Let's see. So I'm going to copy and paste some commands in here because I already have them saved on the little browser, little notepad next to me. So let me bring them up. All right. Here is my user. Paste that in. So create user, Django user in quotation marks, at localhost. They're always going to be at localhost unless you're connected remotely. Identified by whatever password you want. Here's just some random password I generated. So that was okay. So now I need to create my database for the project. Create database tutorial. Then I need to grant all privileges on that database. Let's see. Grant, there we go. Grant all privileges on tutorial.star, which means .all. So the tutorial database and all the tables inside of it. Grant all privileges to that to my user. And then finally, we just flush our privileges, which reloads that privilege table, and then we exit. That's it. You could go back in here and you could show your databases if you wanted to see that there's our tutorial. If I use the tutorial database and I show tables, there's nothing in there because we haven't migrated anything over using Django yet. But we do have MySQL installed and everything's good there. Not trying to get this thing out of the way. There we go. All right, so we need to connect MySQL and Django together. Now, it's very important that you install these two packages using apt prior to trying to install MySQL client. If I were to install MySQL client right now using pip, and I'll do it for you, I'm gonna get all sorts of errors. Pip install MySQL client. Let's see, I think I spelled it wrong. Pip install MySQL client. Okay, all sorts of errors right there. That's because I don't kind of have the packages, you know, at the system level downloaded. So if you see this, it's a very simple fix. You just need to make sure you install these first. So I'm gonna do, let me do this. Apt install, let's see, what is it? Python 3 dev. There we go. All right, so Python 3 dev was installed. The next one we need is lib MySQL client dev. So apt install lib MySQL client dev. Yes to acknowledge that. Should be a fast install, so I won't bother pausing it. And there you go. So now that I have those two installed, now if I go rerun this pip install MySQL client, now it's going to work. There you go. And there are different ways to connect Django and MySQL. I'm just using MySQL client because, hey, it's easy and it works and I know how to do it. So there it is. All right, now we need to basically tell Django where to connect to our database. So we need to go into settings.py. In settings.py, there's a constant called databases. It's a dictionary. And it says, hey, here's our default database. We need to basically go in there and make it match this. So let's bring up our editor here and let's go into, let's cd to where our settings are, cd tutorial, and let's nano settings. So here is my settings. I'm going to scroll down all the way until I see databases, which is right here. And all right, so the engine is going to be the database engine. All we have to do is change this from Django.db.backends SQLite 3 to MSQL, MySQL. Name is going to be the name of the database. In this case, I called mine, I believe it was tutorial. The next thing that's up is going to be the user, which is the username that we created to connect. Mine was Django user. The next up is going to be password. I think it's password, maybe it's pass. Yeah, it's password. And then that's the password I created for the user, which, let me bring up my cheat sheet here and copy and paste it in. It was this right here. Okay. These next two are optional. They basically default. It's the host, which is localhost, and the port, which is 3306. Those are defaults, so you should be able to leave them off, but I'll just put them in here anyways. If you were connecting to a remote host, so like you had a completely separate server that was only responsible for running your database, you'd have the IP address for that other server here, and then the port would be 3306 unless you're running MySQL on a non-standard port for whatever reason. All right, Control X. Yes, we're going to save, so Y, and enter to exit. All right, now that we've connected, we've got this set up, let's go ahead and check our Django syntax. So need to go back up to where manage.py is, manage.py check. Okay, syntax looks good, so now I do manage.py migrate, and it's going to migrate all sorts of stuff over. And then finally we'll create our super user, so manage.py create super user. I'm going to leave my leave my username as blank. There we go. That's what I'm trying to say. And so it's going to default to root. Email address we don't care about. Password, I'm going to set just mine to password. Just literally PASSWORD right now. It's going to say, hey, do you want to bypass that? It's too common. Yeah, I do. This is just a quick little tutorial default build that's going to be destroyed once I'm done with it. So I don't really care about having an insecure password for, 10, 20 minutes. All right, so super user was created successfully. To show you, let's go into MySQL again. And let's show our databases. Let's use tutorial. And show our tables. So now I've got all these tables here. And if I want to see that super user I just created, I can say select all from auth user, which is where Django stores your users. Let me tack on a -G to list it out vertically. And there you go. Username, root, password. You can see it's hashed, right? The date joined was today. Is staff is 1 because it's a super user. Is active is 1 by default. And is super user is 1. So everything's working. We migrated stuff. We created a super user and we inserted that into MySQL. So everything looks good there. Now let's check. Let's actually try to log in. So we're going to go in our browser, go to our IP address, :8000/admin. Make sure you don't forget the /admin. We're going to log in to the Django admin panel. So here I am. I'm just going to say tack on /admin to that URL. Oh, one thing I forgot before we do that is we need to run our server. So Python manage.py run server 0.0.0.0:8000. There we go. Now I should be able to access it. Perfect. All right, root is going to be my username. Password was just straight up password. And I have access to the Django admin panel right here. Everything's working. We got our site hosted. We have it connected to a database, and we are able to interact with the database. So everything's going good. All right, now we just need to install and configure Apache 2 so that I no longer have to manually type in the port at the end of that URL. Or if I have an IP address, or excuse me, a URL and DNS set up correctly, I won't need to type in my IP address. I just type in the URL for the website. All right, so let's get started here. We're almost done. This is kind of the last step. All right, install and configure Apache 2. So let me close out of my Django server, and we need to do this. So apt install Apache 2, which is going to install the Apache 2 web server, and then lib Apache 2 mod wsgi-py3. Funny name there, long name, and I'll just do yes to acknowledge all that. The mod wsgi.py, so WSGI stands for WebSocket Gateway Interface. Web Server Gateway Interface. Basically, your Apache 2 only understands text, if you will, raw text. Python has all sorts of Python code in there. It needs to do something. So we basically need something to live in between Apache 2 and our Django Python application. So we have this thing called WSGI, your Web Server Gateway Interface. It's a standardized convention that web servers use to forward requests to web applications. Not super important. All we need to know is that Apache 2 is really going to route all its requests to this WSGI. And then WSGI is going to run them via Python and Django. All right, so let's see here. We installed it. Let's check our Apache installation. So if I go back to my server here and I delete everything, including the port, and just do straight up the IP address, I should see this, my Apache 2 Ubuntu default page. That tells me Apache 2 is installed and working correctly. The next thing we're going to do here is we're going to go to Etsy, Etsy being etc. It's at root Etsy Apache 2 sites available. There's a file there, 000-default.conf, and we're going to update it to serve our Python file. Because right now that If I go Etsy, what is it? Apache 2, sites available. Right now, if we go in here, the reason we're seeing that default page in the web browser is because it's set to serve this. So this is the default configuration for Apache. We're going to change this because when I go to my IP address, I want it to serve the Django project, not that default page. This is the portion of the project which will probably cause the most errors / headache. Some of the error messages can be a little hard to figure out, and then you also sometimes have to worry about permission errors or permissions and whatnot, file permissions. So normally, if you have a problem in the build, it's going to be in the hookup between WSGI and Apache. But I'm going to hopefully show you some stuff that'll help you. Here's an example of what you should be putting in, but let's go ahead and I'll talk about it line by line. First thing we can do is we can literally delete all this. So nano, I'm just hitting Control K, which deletes all the lines. All right, so I say, all right, virtual host, anything at port 80, which is, the standard port 80, which is fine there. First things we're going to add are our logs. So our error log, this is the Apache error log, and it's going to say, hey, when I get errors, where should I log it? Well, we created the log file, so let's go ahead or log folder. So let's say, hey, when you have errors, go into the Django project, site, logs, and I want you to log them there under the error.log file. Now, the custom log, which is everything else like your access log and whatnot, I want you to do the same thing, same exact location basically, at least the location, but instead of the error log, let's call it access log. And we'll see what these two look like and what they're actually showing you. Error log and access log are going to be very crucial for debugging in the future. All right, now what we need to do is we need to tell Apache where that WSGI file is, and I'll save this real fast and show you. This is really going to be if I cd to my root, cd to my Django project, cd to the source, and cd to, let me see, the name of tutorial. This is where wsgi.py lives. So if I do a pwd for print working directory, this directory is where the wsgi.py lives. So this is where we need to tell Apache, hey, go in there and run this file. So let me do a nano Etsy Apache 2 sites available 000default.conf. Honestly, what I should have done prior to editing this, I probably should have copied the 00default.conf to like a 000 old conf or something, just so I could have saved that, default Apache configuration file, but not a big deal. All right, so we need to say directory and the path to that WSGI file. So not the actual WSGI file. I'm not saying go into Django project source tutorial WSGI.py up here. No, I'm just saying, hey, here's where the file is located. Close my directory tag, and I'm going to say require all granted. Basically, Apache needs to be able to access and run that file, so it needs to have good permissions for that. If it tries to access this and that directory doesn't exist, or Apache doesn't have the right permissions, I want it to basically throw me an error right off the bat. All right, now what we need to do, and this is kind of the 3 lines that make or break the project normally. Okay, this can make or break it if you don't know where your WSGI.py file is, but this is normally what's going on, or what's going to cause you the most errors. WSGI script alias. Okay, the first parameter here is really the URL that when Apache sees a specific URL, it wants to serve this. So this is basically saying root. So anytime Apache sees root URL, which is just our website or IP address, what do I want it to really do? I really want it to go into the Django project source tutorial and run that wsgi.py file. So your wsgi script alias, the first parameter should just be root unless you're doing some other stuff. And the second parameter should be the full absolute path to your wsgi.py. All right, the next things you need to do is a wsgi daemon process. Okay, you give it a process name. This can be whatever you want. I'm just going to call it the same name as my project. Okay. The Python home is going to be, this is going to point to our virtual environment path. So mine's in Django project VENV. Notice I'm not going further. I'm not saying Django project VENV bin scripts or anything like that. I'm just saying here's the root of the virtual environment. The next thing I need to do is Python path. And the Python path is basically going to point to the directory where manage.py lives. So mine is Django project source. And that's where my manage.py is. So the very last thing we need to add here is wsgi process group. Kind of not really important to talk about. We just really need this here, and we need it to have the same name that's up here for this daemon process. All right, with these 3 lines, so remember, wsgi script alias, first parameter should be root unless you're doing something else more advanced. And this needs to point to the full absolute path to wsgi.py. Daemon process has some random name. It's not really important. But the Python home is going to point to your root level of your virtual environment folder. Python path is going to point to whatever folder holds the manage.py. And I have a little error right there. See, Django PRJETCT, whatever. There you go, Django project. All right, so if I save this, and we can check our Apache, our Apache syntax by doing, what is it, Apache CTL config test, I think it is. So I got some error. Custom log takes 2 or 3 arguments, a file name, so something's wrong in my custom log. Oh, I forgot the second argument here. It's the path to the file we want the log to be logged at, and then I got to do combine. That's really it for that. That should fix that. So let's try it again. Apache CTL config test, syntax okay, so that's perfect. We don't really care about this error right there at all. Now we need to restart Apache, so you do, what is it, service Apache 2 restart. Should do it, yep. Now let's go ahead and let's go to our URL. Notice I don't have any ports running. If I hit refresh, I got pretty lucky in the fact that this worked right off the bat. If you have something wrong, such as, let me go ahead and change my configuration file real fast. And let's just say I have something like a path error. So my Python home doesn't point to my Django project, or my virtual environment correctly. I could get something like this. All right, so it's thinking right now, it should be breaking itself. It's still thinking. Obviously, something's not working because this is just constantly spinning. So we could check our access log. So I could do tail/f, which means follow. And I would say Django project log. What is it? Site log, access log. So yeah, something is kind of weird there. We could check our error log. It says right here we're unable to find some static file, so something's going on. So let's go ahead and rechange, set our nano back up to what it's supposed to be. Django project ven Save it. Check our syntax. And restart Apache. All right, Apache is restarted. Refresh this, and it's working correctly. One common error you'll also see is if you don't have this Python path set up correctly. So this is pointing to something other than, or you don't even have it. You don't even have the Python path. Let's restart Apache. This should give us like a 500 error. Yep, perfect. And why did it give us a 500 error? Let's look at our access log. So /f Django project site logs error log. Okay, it says module not found, no module name tutorial, and you can look at it. So this tells me if I see this, no module name tutorial, this tells me my WSGI file is working, or at least the path is working correctly. Because otherwise I'd get a different error, which I'll show you in a second. So if you see something like this, normally it just means you need to point your Python home, or excuse me, your Python path to be the directory that manage.py lives in. Python path is going to equal to, what is it, Django project slash source, I think is all I need there. Should fix it. Yep, there we go. The other one, kind of common one you'll see that should raise some flags is if you have, if you don't have your Python home set at all. So again, that's your virtual environment. Set it all, or it's to the wrong thing. Restart Apache. This is going to give me an error. I look at my errors by looking at my server log, and this, so module not found, no module named Django means something's wrong with your virtual environment. Up here, no module named tutorial, so one of your actual project directories, that means there's something wrong with your Python path. Oops, so we'll fix those real fast, get it back to where it was working. Python path is good. Python home needs to go to our virtual environment, which is just at, let's see, Django project /venv. Alrighty, so that's all working. Cool. The very last thing is static files. I'm going to do static and media files all at once here. But let's see what happens if we set our, I'm going to cd to, I guess I'm already here, so let's take our settings.py and let's change our debug to false, because you never really want to run debug as true in environment or in production. Debug should always be false. But when we do that, and anytime you do changes to your code using this setup, you're going to have to restart Apache for those changes to be reflected. So restart Apache. This right here off the bat is once Apache restarts, I'm going to get not found. This can be very confusing. The reason we're getting not found is because I do not have a URL defined for my root path. All right, so, and what Django does basically, if it's in debug mode and you don't have anything pointing to the index page, it'll just create you that default working page, that default, page. So what I need to do is path, and then we'll give it some view. I need to define that view, and give me a second. I need to pause this because actually I don't remember how to define a single function-based view in Python and Django. All right, I went to the Django documentation and just kind of copied some of their stuff. But so here it is. This is just a simple page that's going to return just some random text that says you're at the polls index. Who cares? And then we're saying, hey, we define now a path for root, or basically nothing, and it's saying anytime you hit root, go ahead and run this index. So now that we do this, we wrote some code. Let's restart our server, our Apache server. Now when I go here, it shows me my view for that page. But what I was getting at for the static files and whatnot is if I go to admin, you can look and you can see it's obviously not serving my files correctly. I have no CSS or anything. I can look here and I'll get all sorts of 404 errors and whatnot that it can't load specific files. So to fix this, the reason this is happening is Django web server in debug will serve all your static files for you. However, in production, it will not. When debug is false, it will not. So what we need to do is we saw this here. We already made the directory static it's going to live at. So we need to go into our settings.py, here, and we need to create this static root variable. And then I'm also going to create a media root. And then we're also going to have to update Apache to say our conf file to say, this is where our static files and our media files are located at. So let's do that real fast. Shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes, and then we'll be done. So let's nano settings.py. If I page down here to the end, here's static URL. I'm just going to put my code right here. So static root is going to be an absolute path, Django project, site, public, static. I think that's what we said, yep. Media root's going to be the same. Django project, site. Well, I guess not the same. It goes to media instead. There you go. So static root is going to be when I collect my static files, Python or Django is going to copy everything over there. So boom, save it, run it. And now if I go back up to where manage.py is, so real fast, I'll do an ls for Django project, site, public, static first. There's nothing in there. But if I say manage.py, collect static, okay, 128 static files copied to my static root path. If I ls there, they're all right in there under admin. I can ls and admin in there and see all the different files. But I'm still not good because Apache doesn't know about those files yet. Apache doesn't really know about that static directory. So let's go into cd to etc, Apache 2, sites available, and let's nano the conf file. Now we just need to come up here and we need to basically say, okay, alias, whenever you see static URL, what I want you to do is I want you to go into the Django project, site, Django project, site, public, static. Okay, it's a directory that I'm going to make sure you are granted access to. Directory is going to be Django project. Let's see. Django projects, site, public, static. Yep, same thing there. And we're just going to say require all granted. And it's all granted lowercase. Okay, and let's restart our, I guess we could do a config test. That's good. And service Apache to restart. And now if I go here to admin, there we go. Now we're getting our static files served correctly. The only other thing you'll want to do is basically do that same exact thing for your media files, if you are going to deal with media files. All right, so you can just basically copy and paste this. Paste that, and we'll change this. Our alias is going to be media, so anytime, hey, you see root media in your URL, I want you to go into the Django project, site, public, media directory to find that file. And that is really it. Service Apache 2 restart. And I don't really have anything I can upload here to test that. The only other thing I would do before you're fully done is I'd set our permissions for the site folder, the public folder, to have Apache have full access to it. So if you cd to Django project site public, so this is all publicly accessible stuff, static files and user generated media files. So what I would really do is I'd go up one and I'd basically do a change own -r, which is, this is change ownership recursive. We're going to www.data : www.data. Before I do this, I'll actually show you what I'm talking about. If I do an ls-l now, media and static folders are owned by root. I don't want that. I want them to be owned and accessible by Apache's group, which is www.data. So now I'll go back up and I'll change that whole folder. So change own -r www.data public. Okay. Now www.data holds, it has access to public. It's the owner. If I go into public and I look at it, media and static are the same. Just to make sure everything's working, let's again just restart Apache 2, make sure I didn't break anything with those permission changes, and refresh, and we are good to go. So that is the basics of how to deploy Django using Ubuntu 20.4 and configuring your Apache conf file. Again, the 90% of your issues are going to arise from your setup here in your conf file. So chances are, if you're running into some error, it's got something to do with here. Most likely it's either these 3 lines here, or it is let's see, where's our WSGI? Let's see. Oh, this actually should have said wsgi.py, but that is apparently working. Yeah, this right here, it really should have said, which is fine, because I'm basically saying, hey, you're supposed to have access to everything in tutorial. Really, it should have been this files, and then this specific file that I wanted, wsgi.py. But it's obviously working without that, so, you know, if you feel like doing this, go for it. If you don't, that's fine. And let me restart Apache 2 and just make sure it's working with that change. There we go. Okay. All right, that's it. So cool, hour-long video. I'll throw some timestamps in the description here to make it a little bit easier for you. But hope you enjoyed it. And like, subscribe if you do. If you got any questions, which I'm sure you're running into some problems somewhere, just drop into the Discord and shoot me a message.